The cameras flashed, but they weren't for her. She stood 7 months pregnant at the Harrison Foundation gala, clutching a glass of water, while her millionaire husband, William Harrison III, wrapped his arm around another woman. In front of all of New York high society, he raised a glass not to his wife, but to his mistress, publicly humiliating the woman carrying his child. 5 years later, his company is crumbling, and the board is waiting on a new CEO to save them. The elevator doors open, and in walks his new boss. It's her. This isn't just a comeback, it's a takeover. The penthouse at 157 wasn't a home, it was a statement. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god-like view of Central Park, a sprawling green carpet laid out 80 stories below. But to Catherine Harrison, the view felt like a cage. The glass was cold to the touch, just like the marriage it represented. Everything was glass and steel and shades of grey, a monochrome existence punctuated only by the astronomical price tags of the art on the walls. Catherine, now 7 months pregnant, traced the outline of a brittle, leafless tree in the park below. She was supposed to be happy. She was the wife of William Will Harrison III, the charismatic, ruthless heir to the Harrison global logistics empire. Their life was a curated series of press releases, glamorous trips, strategic philanthropic gestures, and now the joyous expectation of an heir. But the reality was silence. Will hadn't touched her, not really touched her, with affection, in months. He was a man of transactions. Their marriage had been a transaction, her quiet, stable, old money family name, though the money was long gone, for his boisterous new money empire that needed a veneer of class. The baby, she had hoped, would be the one thing that was real, the one thing that was theirs. She heard the whisper of the private elevator arriving. Will was home. He strode into the vast living room, loosening the dark silk tie of his bespoke Tom Ford suit. He didn't look at her, his gaze already fixed on the tablet in his other hand. "You're home early," Catherine said, her voice soft, hopeful. "Board meeting finished. Davies is still waffling on the Alistair Holdings merger," he muttered, tossing his jacket onto a $50,000 suede chair. Incompetent fool. He walked to the bar, pouring himself 3 fingers of Macallan 25. "Will, the gala is tonight," she reminded him gently. "The Harrison Foundation event. It's the big one." "I'm aware, Catherine. I'm paying for it." He took a sip, the ice clinking. "Isabella is handling the press. She's sorting out the seating charts." Isabella. The name landed like a stone in Catherine's stomach. Isabella Vance, Will's senior VP of Public Relations, a woman who was all sharp angles, crimson lipstick, and a predatory intelligence. A woman who looked at Catherine not with malice, but with something far worse. Pity. Isabella, who handled everything, who handled Will. "I picked up my dress," Catherine tried again, forcing a smile. "It's a custom Lanvin. They did a beautiful job with the, you know." She gestured to her swollen stomach. "Good. Great." He was scrolling through emails. "Make sure you're ready by 7. The photographers will be there for the entrance. I need this to look good, Catherine. The Alistair board is watching. A stable family image is paramount." A stable family image, not a stable family. Is she sitting at our table?" Catherine asked, already knowing the answer. "Of course," Will said, not looking up. "She's running the event. I need her nearby in case one of these old money dinosaurs says something stupid to the Wall Street Journal. Don't be difficult, Catherine. You know her role is vital." Catherine nodded, the familiar sting behind her eyes. She had known, for the better part of a year, that Isabella's role extended far beyond public relations. She saw the late-night texts he thought he'd hidden. She smelled the faint, unfamiliar Chanel perfume on his shirts when he came home from late mergers. She saw the way his eyes followed Isabella in the boardroom, a hunger he never, ever directed at his own wife. She had stayed silent for the baby. She believed the baby would change everything. It would anchor Will, make him see what was real, what mattered. The gala tonight, his foundation's biggest event, was supposed to be their night, a celebration of their family, their future. "I'll go get ready," she whispered. Will just grunted in response, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of his tablet. As Catherine walked to their cavernous bedroom, she passed a framed photo on the marble console. It was from their wedding, 3 years ago. Will was smiling, but his eyes were cold, focused on the camera, on the image. She was smiling too, but she was looking at him, desperate for him to look back. She stopped and touched the cold glass of the frame. She felt her son kick, a small, hopeful flutter beneath her heart. "It's okay, little one," she murmured, pressing her hand to her stomach. "Tonight he'll see us. Tonight, he'll finally see." But as she zipped up the deep emerald silk of her gown, a chilling premonition settled over her. She wasn't an idiot. She was a woman who had been systematically isolated, made to feel dependent, and gaslighted into believing her suspicions were just hormonal or ungrateful. Tonight wasn't a celebration. It felt like an execution. And she was walking willingly to the gallows, draped in French silk. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds and counterfeit smiles. It was the epitome of New York's philanthropic elite, a place where billionaires wrote checks to cleanse their corporate sins and socialites competed for the brightest spotlight. Tonight, the spotlight was firmly on the Harrison table. Catherine felt the weight of hundreds of eyes as she walked beside Will. Her pregnancy, once her private hope, now felt like a public vulnerability. She was a ship in full sail, and she felt desperately, dangerously exposed. Will was electric, a king in his element. He gripped her elbow in a gesture that looked like affection to the cameras, but felt like a vice to her. "Smile, Catherine," he hissed, his own smile a brilliant white flash. "You look pale." They reached the head table, and there she was, Isabella Vance, seated directly to Will's right, in a backless, blood-red dress that seemed to suck all the light in the room toward it. She looked like a weapon. "Catherine, you look lovely." "So maternal," Isabella purred, her eyes flicking over Catherine's baby bump with a clinical, dismissive air. She rose and gave Catherine an air kiss that smelled of champagne and victory. "Isabella," Catherine replied, forcing her own smile. "The room is beautiful." "Thank you. I micromanaged every detail. Will knows he can count on me to get things done." She shot a look at Will so intimate, it made Catherine's blood run cold. The dinner was a blur of polite conversation. Catherine poked at a seared scallop, the smell making her nauseous. She listened as Will and Isabella dominated the conversation, recounting a genius, hostile takeover in Chicago, finishing each other's sentences. The other guests at the table, a bank CEO, a senator, a tech mogul, watched the interplay, their expressions ranging from amusement to mild embarrassment. Catherine was invisible. She was the brood mare, the placid, smiling accessory. Then it was time for the speeches. Will stood up, tapping his glass for silence. The room quieted instantly. "Thank you all for coming," Will began, his voice reasoning with power and charm. "The Harrison Foundation is proud to support this city's future. We believe in building things that last, legacies, strong foundations." Catherine felt a small swell of pride. This was the man she had tried to love. "A company, a legacy, is not built by one man," Will continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. It is built by vision. It is built by tireless dedication. It is built by a partner who sees the world not just for what it is, but for what it can be. Catherine's hand went to her stomach. He was talking about them, about the baby. This last year has been transformative, Will said, his gaze locking on to someone. Not her. His eyes were fixed, with a burning, raw intensity, on Isabella. I have been lucky enough to have a partner who is fearless, brilliant, and truly, truly indispensable. A person who has sacrificed everything to stand by my side, to fight the battles with me, to build this empire. The room was silent. Everyone could see where he was looking. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't happening. So I want to raise my glass, Will said, lifting his champagne flute high, not just to the foundation, but to the real architect of my success, the woman who is the future of the Harrison brand. He turned, beaming, and held his glass out to Isabella. To Isabella Vance. Isabella stood up, her red dress catching the light. She looked directly at Catherine, her smile a mask of triumph, and then turned back to Will, accepting the toast. The room erupted in confused, polite applause. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. The millionaire toasting his mistress and his pregnant wife, frozen, staring at them, her face a perfect mask of horror. It was a public execution. He hadn't just admitted to the affair, he had celebrated it. He had declared Isabella his true partner and Catherine a glorified surrogate. Catherine stood up. The scraping of her chair was agonizingly loud. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. She mumbled, "Excuse me," and walked, as quickly and gracefully as she could, toward the exit, her hand pressed against her stomach. She made it to the marble-floored corridor before the first sob tore through her. She ducked into a small alcove near the coat check, fighting for air. The click of heels on the marble floor stopped behind her. "You really shouldn't make a scene, Catherine." She turned. It was Will. His face was no longer charming. It was cold, hard, and angry. "How could you?" she whispered, the tears streaming hot on her cheeks. "In front of everyone. Our friends? You're bored? I'm carrying your child." "Don't be naive," he snapped, his voice a low hiss. "You knew what this marriage was. It was a contract. You fulfilled your part of the bargain. You're giving me an heir. But don't ever mistake your role for Isabella's." "My role?" she choked out, disbelieving. "You are a placeholder, Catherine. A comfortable, appropriate placeholder. Isabella, she's my equal. She challenges me. She understands what I want. The merger with Alistair Holdings is next week, and I can't have a weak, sentimental woman on my arm. I need a killer. I need her." "So what am I?" Catherine asked, the tears stopping, replaced by a terrifying, icy calm. "What happens to me and the baby?" "You'll be fine," he said dismissively. "You'll have the Harrison name. The child will have a trust fund. You'll be comfortable. But we," he gestured back to the ballroom, "are over. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. My lawyers will be in touch with you. They'll be very generous, as long as you are quiet and cooperative." He adjusted his tuxedo cuffs. "Now, I suggest you go home. My driver is waiting out front. I'm going back to the party. Isabella and I are celebrating." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the cold corridor, the sound of applause and laughter from the ballroom echoing behind him. She looked down at her emerald silk dress, now stained with her tears. He hadn't just left her. He had gutted her, displayed her for parts, and left her to bleed out on the floor of the Plaza Hotel. The last thread of hope she'd been clinging to didn't just break. He had set it on fire. The humiliation was absolute. By morning, The gossip columns were ablaze. "Harrison Ayres Gala Gambit," screamed one headline. "Wife out, mistress in," declared another. The photos were brutal. Will toasting Isabella and Catherine, alone and pregnant, fleeing the ballroom. Will's lawyers descended, as promised. They were not generous. They were sharks. They offered a one-time settlement that was insulting, contingent on her signing a comprehensive NDA that would forbid her from ever speaking about Will, Isabella, or Harrison Global. When she hesitated, still in shock, they became ruthless. They froze her access to their joint accounts. They claimed in a preliminary filing that she was emotionally unstable and a potential risk to the Harrison heir, using her heartbroken flight from the gala as proof. Suddenly, the staff at the penthouse, the driver, the housekeeper, were no longer hers. They were Will's eyes and ears, reporting her every tearful phone call. She was a prisoner in her own home. She was forced to move into a small, sterile apartment, paid for by Will's lawyers on a month-to-month lease, a leash to ensure her compliance. The opulence of 157 was replaced by beige walls and cheap furniture that smelled of particle board and glue. She was alone, 8 months pregnant, and legally gagged. 2 weeks later, she gave birth to her son, Thomas, in a public hospital, alone. She called Will's office to inform him of his son's birth. His secretary informed her that Mr. Harrison was in negotiations in Zurich and would address the matter upon his return. He never called. He never came. He never saw his son. Catherine held her tiny, perfect baby in the sterile hospital room and made a vow. She would not be a victim. She would not be a footnote in William Harrison's biography. Her son would never know this weakness. Her heartbreak, so vast it felt like it would drown her, slowly, painfully, began to crystallize. It hardened from grief into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. A month later, a registered letter arrived at her apartment. It wasn't from Will's lawyers. The return address was in Mayfair, London. She didn't recognize the name. Richard Alistair. She opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter, old-fashioned, written on thick, cream-colored stationery. "My dearest Catherine, you do not know me. I am your mother's brother. We were estranged long before you were born, a family quarrel of no importance now. I have respected that estrangement, perhaps foolishly. I have been following your situation in the press. Your husband, William Harrison III, is the son of a man I despise. The old William Harrison was a thief who built his empire on stolen ideas. I see the apple has not fallen far from the tree. He is trying to merge with my company, Alistair Holdings. He will fail. I, however, have a problem. I am an old man. I am dying. And I have no heir. I have watched you from afar. You have your mother's resilience, but you also have my blood. I cannot let what I have built fall into the hands of vultures like the Harrisons. I am offering you a different life, a life of power. Come to London, you and your son. I will teach you everything I know. I will teach you how to build, how to command, and how to dismantle. I will give you the one thing that woman Isabella and your husband truly respect: control. When I am gone, Alistair Holdings will be yours. What you do with it is your own concern. But I suspect we share a mutual interest in seeing the Harrison Empire brought to its knees. A car will be waiting outside your apartment building tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you are in it, your new life begins. If you are not, I will not write again. Your uncle, Richard Alistair Catherine, read the letter 3 times. It was insane. It was a lifeline. It was a weapon. She looked at her son, Thomas, sleeping in a borrowed bassinet. Will had left her with nothing. He had counted on her being weak, broken, and silent. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He hadn't destroyed her. He'd just given her a reason to live. The next morning, Catherine packed one small suitcase with clothes for herself and Thomas. She left the insulting divorce papers unsigned on the cheap laminate kitchen counter. She left the keys to the apartment. At 10 a.m., a black, unassuming sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a simple dark suit got out and opened the rear door. "Ms. Harrison?" "It's Alistair," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady for the first time in months. "My name is Catherine Alistair." She strapped her son into the car seat, got in, and didn't look back as the car pulled into traffic, heading for the airport. She wasn't fleeing. She was advancing in a new direction. The next 5 years were a brutal, relentless education. London was not a refuge, it was a forge. Richard Alistair was a titan of industry, a cold, brilliant man who saw the world in terms of assets, liabilities, and leverage. He wasn't a warm uncle. He was a mentor, a drill sergeant, and a kingmaker. He adored his grandnephew Thomas, but with Catherine, he was merciless. "You're thinking with your heart, Catherine," he would bark at her during their 6 a.m. breakfast meetings in his Mayfair townhouse. "Your heart is a liability. Your husband counted on that. Do not make the same mistake." She started in the mailroom of Alistair Holdings, a sprawling European logistics and private equity firm. She learned the business from the ground up. She worked 18-hour days while a nanny, paid for by Richard, cared for Thomas. She earned her MBA at night from the London School of Economics. She learned finance, corporate law, and mergers and acquisitions. She learned how to spot a weakness in a balance sheet from a mile away. The soft, hopeful woman who had cried in the plaza was gone. In her place was Catherine Alistair, CEO. When Richard passed away peacefully 2 years into her training, the board, at his ironclad direction, voted her in as his successor. She was terrifyingly competent. She was cold, precise, and fair. She expanded Alistair Holdings into new markets, her strategies so aggressive they bordered on predatory. She didn't just command respect, she manufactured it. Her London office was the opposite of Will's penthouse. It was warm woods, leather-bound books, and soft lighting. On her desk, there was only one photo, a smiling, 4-year-old Thomas on a pony in the English countryside. Meanwhile, back in New York, Harrison Global was rotting from the inside. Without Catherine's stabilizing influence and Richard Alistair's company as a potential and now impossible merger, Will's worst instincts had taken over. He and Isabella, whom he had married in a lavish, garish ceremony in Lake Como, were the new king and queen of conspicuous consumption. They bought jets, yachts, and a private island. Isabella's PR budget was a black hole of company funds, spent on designer wardrobes, million-dollar parties, and vanity projects. Will, desperate to look like a visionary, made a series of disastrous, high-risk investments in tech startups that imploded. Harrison Global, once a blue-chip behemoth, was now hemorrhaging money. The stock was plummeting. The board was in quiet rebellion. Will and Isabella, blinded by their own arrogance, were scrambling, taking out high-interest loans to cover their losses, leveraging the company's core assets to the hilt. They were desperate for a cash infusion, a buyout, a savior. In her London office, Catherine read the quarterly reports from her New York acquisitions team. Harrison Global was bleeding out. It was vulnerable. It was cheap. "Mr. Grant," she said over the intercom to her chief legal counsel, Mason Grant. Mason walked in, a sharp man in a Savile Row suit. "Ma'am, we're setting up a new shell corporation, Bridgewater Capital. I want it domiciled in Delaware, funded through our Cayman accounts. It's to remain completely anonymous." "Anonymous acquisition, hostile or friendly?" Mason asked. "It will begin as friendly," Catherine said, her eyes fixed on the New York skyline on her monitor. "I want you to make a tender offer for a controlling stake in Harrison Global. They're desperate, so they'll see it as a rescue. Will Harrison is too arrogant to believe anyone would mount a hostile takeover, and too stupid to see who's really behind it." "He'll fight it," Mason warned. "Let him," Catherine said, a small, cold smile touching her lips for the first time in years. "He'll leverage himself even further. Let him panic. Let him rally the board. And when he's exhausted all his options, Bridgewater Capital will go hostile. We'll buy their debt. We'll buy their outstanding stock. We will buy him." "Understood. And when the acquisition is complete?" Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out over the grey London rain. "When it's complete, you will schedule an emergency board meeting at Harrison Tower. I'll be attending. Personally." The boardroom on the 50th floor of Harrison Tower was thick with the smell of old money and new panic. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members. William Harrison III paced at the head of the table, his face slick with sweat, his usual bravado cracked and flaking. Isabella Harrison sat at his right, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. Her flawless mask of makeup couldn't hide the frantic energy in her eyes. "This is an ambush," Will shouted, slamming his hand on the table. This Bridgewater Capital, it's a vulture fund. They came in pretending to be a partner, and they've spent the last 6 weeks buying our debt, poaching our shareholders. It's a hostile takeover, plain and simple." "A takeover you allowed, Will," said Michael Davies, the oldest board member, his voice dry as paper. "You leveraged the company to the brink to cover your expansion projects. This board warned you. You are the one who put the for sale sign on our front door." "We can fight this," Isabella interjected, her voice a little too sharp. "We can file an injunction. You can do nothing, Mrs. Harrison," Mason Grant said, standing by the door. He was the only calm person in the room. The sale was finalized. As of 9 a.m., Bridgewater Capital acquired a 51% controlling stake in Harrison Global. The new owner has called this meeting. Will stopped pacing. "Owner? Who? Who is it? Who's behind this? I'll double their offer. The main boardroom door slid open with a heavy, expensive whoosh. All heads turned. First, 2 associates from Mason Grant's law firm walked in, carrying briefcases. Then, Mason stepped aside, and she walked in. Catherine Alistair. She was not the woman they remembered. The soft, mousy wife was gone. This woman was sculpted from steel. She wore a bespoke navy blue power suit that was severe and elegant. Her hair, once a gentle brown, was a sleek, dark chestnut, pulled back in a chignon that highlighted the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She radiated an aura of absolute, untouchable control. The room went tomb silent. Will's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared as if he'd seen a ghost. Isabella's crimson-painted lips parted in a silent "oh." She recognized the look of a predator. Catherine walked slowly, deliberately, to the head of the table. She placed her leather satchel down, not on the chair beside Will, but on the chair at the head of the table. Will's chair. She looked at him. Her expression wasn't angry. It was not hateful. It was not even satisfied. It was neutral, the way one might look at a piece of furniture that was in the way. "You're in my seat, Will," she said. Her voice was quiet, with a clipped, transatlantic accent honed in London. Will just stared, sputtering. "Catherine? What is this? What are you doing here?" "She's here," Mason Grant announced, as the sole proprietor and CEO of Bridgewater Capital, which, as you know, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Alistair Holdings. Catherine finally turned her gaze to the stunned board. "Good morning, gentlemen. And Ms. Chen," she nodded to the one other woman. "I am Catherine Alistair, the CEO of Alistair Holdings, and as of 9:01 a.m., I am the majority shareholder and new chairwoman of Harrison Global." The blood drained from Will's face. He physically staggered back, gripping the table for support. No, that's impossible. Richard Alistair hated me. He's dead." "He was my uncle," Catherine said simply, as if stating the weather. "And he was a very smart man. He left his company to family. Now, if you'll all please take your seats, we have a lot to discuss." Isabella found her voice first. "You bitch!" she hissed. "This is what? Some kind of pathetic revenge fantasy." Catherine looked at Isabella, truly looked at her, for the first time. She tilted her head, a scientist examining a microbe. "Revenge? Mrs. Harrison, this is a corporate restructuring. Harrison Global is a failing company with bloated executive leadership and catastrophic debt. I am here to fix it. This isn't personal, it's just business." She turned to the board, who were watching this with a mixture of terror and awe. "My first act as chairwoman," Catherine continued, her voice crisp, "is to announce a full, external, and forensic audit of the last 5 years of executive expenses, all PR and marketing budgets, and all private travel." Isabella's face went from red to a ghostly white. "My second act," Catherine said, "is to schedule immediate performance reviews for all senior executive staff. My team will be handling them." She looked at Will. "We'll start with your division, Will. I believe you're head of acquisitions. We should discuss those failed tech startups." Will was shaking. "You can't. This is my company. My father." "Your father's company," Catherine corrected him, "is now my company. You are, as of this moment, an employee, and frankly, Mr. Harrison, your performance has been deeply unsatisfactory. Mr. Davies, please move. I believe Mr. Harrison needs to sit down." She took her place at the head of the table. The king was dead. Long live the Queen. The audit was not a review. It was an autopsy. Catherine's team of forensic accountants, led by Mason Grant, descended on the executive floor of Harrison Global like a wolf pack. They were not interested in spreadsheets. They were interested in receipts, travel manifests, and offshore bank accounts. Within 72 hours, they found what Catherine already knew was there. The rot was concentrated in 2 places: Will's catastrophic high-risk investments, which he'd hidden from the board, and Isabella's PR budget. Isabella hadn't just been spending lavishly, she had been committing wire fraud. She had created shell companies, fake event planners, consulting firms, and influencer agencies, and had been awarding them 7-figure contracts from the Harrison Global marketing budget. The money was then funneled directly to a private account in her name. She had stolen, by their initial estimate, over $22 million. Catherine sat in her new office, Will's old office, which she'd had completely redecorated in warm woods and soft greys, removing the garish chrome and black leather, when Mason Grant brought her the final report. "It's worse than we thought," Mason said, placing the thick binder on her desk. "It's not just embezzlement. It's tax evasion, wire fraud. She's creative." "And Mr. Harrison?" Catherine asked, flipping to the executive summary. "Willfully ignorant at best. Complicit at worst," Mason replied. "He co-signed on 3 of the largest contracts to the shell companies. He may not have known where the money was going, but he's on the hook for gross negligence. The board has grounds to terminate him with cause. No severance, no parachute." "No," Catherine said. Mason looked surprised. Ma'am? Firing him is an escape. He'd take his remaining personal wealth, lick his wounds, and disappear to some private island. He doesn't get to escape, Catherine said, her voice devoid of emotion. His humiliation must be as public as mine was. He stays. He'll keep his title. But I'm reassigning him. She picked up the phone. Send Mrs. Harrison in, please. Isabella stormed into the office moments later. The last 3 days of the audit had clearly worn on her. She was no longer the sleek predator. She looked ragged, desperate. You have to call them off, Isabella shrieked, advancing on the desk. This is harassment. You have no right to. Sit down, Isabella, Catherine said, her voice quiet, but carrying an authority that stopped Isabella cold. Isabella, shocked at her own compliance, sank into one of the chairs facing the desk. Catherine slid the binder across the polished wood. My audit team has found some discrepancies in your PR budget. Isabella's eyes widened as she saw the cover page. Forensic audit. I. Vance, executive expenses. This is $22 million, Isabella, Catherine said. Vance Innovations, Global Style Consultants, Apex Event Management, all shell companies, all registered to a post office box in the Cayman Islands, all controlled by you. Isabella's breath hitched. She was trapped. You can't prove that, she whispered. I don't have to, Catherine said, leaning back. The district attorney's office will. Mr. Grant has already forwarded this entire file to the SEC and the Manhattan DA. They found it compelling. Isabella's entire body began to tremble. You're sending me to jail? The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, pathetic terror. Catherine, please, don't do this. He made me. He pushed me, the spending, the lifestyle. He's the one you want. Catherine watched her, her face unreadable. You did this to yourself. You were a thief. A clumsy one at that. You saw an opportunity, and you took it, and you never once thought there would be consequences. That's the problem with people like you and Will. You think you're untouchable. Catherine pressed a button on her desk phone. Sarah, please send in security. No! Isabella lunged forward, trying to grab the binder. Please, Catherine, I'll give it back. I'll give it all back. Don't do this. Think of what we... There is no we, Catherine said, as 2 uniformed security guards entered the office. There is only you and what you did. You can't, Isabella screamed as the guards took her by the arms. Will, do something! The guards escorted the screaming, struggling woman out of the office and into the main hallway, in front of the entire executive floor. Employees poked their heads out of offices, watching as Isabella Harrison, the queen of Harrison Global, was marched to the elevator in handcuffs. Catherine stood and walked to her window, watching the silent, snow-filled sky over Central Park. An hour later, her assistant buzzed. Mr. Harrison is here to see you. He seems unwell. Send him in. Will stumbled into the office. He was a broken man. His suit was rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. He had clearly been watching from the sidelines as his wife was arrested. They took her, he whispered, slumping into the chair Isabella had just vacated. They arrested her, Catherine, in the lobby. The press was there. How did the press get there? I sent a release, Catherine said, sipping her tea. A proactive statement about the company's new leadership taking a zero-tolerance policy on executive fraud. Will stared at her, the reality of his situation finally dawning. He wasn't her partner. He wasn't her equal. He wasn't even her enemy. He was just collateral damage. What do you want? He begged, his voice cracking. My money? The house? It's yours. Just call them. Tell them it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. You can fix this. I'm not fixing this, Will. I am cleaning it. She stole from my company. She's a criminal. And you, Catherine said, her gaze hardening, are an idiot. You signed off on it. You were so blinded by your own arrogance and so desperate to maintain your lavish lifestyle that you didn't even bother to read what you were signing. So fire me, he yelled, a pathetic attempt at his old bravado. Fire me, ruin me, get it over with. Fire you? Catherine almost laughed. No, Will, you're not getting off that easy. As of tomorrow, you are being reassigned. Reassigned? To where? Harrison Global owns a number of subsidiaries, including, she pulled up a file on her computer, a 20,000 square foot warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn. It's our legacy document storage facility. It's where we send all our paper files from before 2005. It's cold, it's damp, and the Wi-Fi is terrible. Will's face went white. A warehouse? You will be the director of legacy archives. Your job will be to digitally scan and catalogue 3 decades of shipping manifests. You will report to the head of logistics, a Mr. Peterson, who, I believe, you demoted 5 years ago. You will keep your salary. You will keep your title. But you will spend the rest of your career in a concrete box, looking at paper. You wanted to build a legacy, Will. Now, you get to archive one. He couldn't speak. It was a sentence worse than firing. It was erasure. She was making him invisible, just as he had done to her. Get out of my office, Mr. Harrison, Catherine said, turning back to her computer. You have a long commute tomorrow. 6 months passed. Harrison Global, under Catherine's leadership, was being rebuilt. She had restructured the debt, sold off the toxic assets, including the jet, the yacht, and the private island, and infused the company with Alistair's cutting-edge logistics technology. The stock was stable and beginning to climb. The board, once terrified of her, now worshipped her. Will Harrison had vanished. He was a ghost within his own company. He did as he was told, driving his modest sedan from his now empty penthouse, which was on the market as he could no longer afford the maintenance, to the cold warehouse in Red Hook. He spent his days in a windowless room, the click of the industrial scanner, the only sound. He was a laughingstock, the man who had everything reduced to a file clerk by the wife he'd thrown away. He had tried, twice, to resign. Both times, Catherine's legal team had reminded him that his employment contract had a 5-year non-compete clause, which she intended to enforce. If he quit, he couldn't work in logistics, the only industry he knew, anywhere in North America. He was trapped. One evening, Catherine was working late, finalizing a new merger. Her assistant had long since gone home. The only light on the 50th floor was from her office. There was a knock. She looked up. Will was standing in the doorway. She hadn't seen him in months. He was thin, pale, and looked 20 years older. His expensive suit hung off him. "They won't let me up here," he said, his voice raspy. "I had to use the fire stairs. I have to talk to you." Catherine looked at him for a long moment, then nodded to the chair. "You have 2 minutes." He sat down, his hands trembling. "Isabella. She's taking a plea. 10 years. They're taking everything." "That is the consequence of her actions," Catherine said. I know. He swallowed, looking at the floor. I get it. Okay? You win. You won. You took the company. You ruined me. You ruined her. You've had your revenge. It's done. I told you, Will. This was never revenge. This was a hostile takeover. You were a bad investment. You were incompetent, and you were running this company into the ground. I saved it." "No," he said, looking up, his eyes suddenly burning with a new, different kind. This is a new, different kind of pain. This is revenge. Be honest, just once. This was all for what I did to you, at the gala, with the baby. Catherine was silent. The baby, he whispered. Our son. Catherine, I want to see him. Catherine's face, which had been a mask of corporate ice, finally changed. The neutrality vanished, replaced by a slow-burning, Arctic fury that was more terrifying than any rage. You want to see him? She repeated. Yes. He's my son. My heir. I have a right. A right? Catherine stood up, her voice a low, dangerous growl. You have no rights. You lost them when you sent your secretary to tell me you were in Zurich. You lost them when you never called, never visited, and never once asked if he was alive. You lost them when you tried to leave me, your pregnant wife, with nothing, calling me unstable in a court of law to try and take him from me. I was angry. Isabella. You were you, Catherine snapped. That was all you. He doesn't have a father. He has an uncle who taught his mother how to be strong. He has a name, Thomas Alistair. My name. Alistair, you took my name from him. You took your name from him, she said, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. You don't get to claim him now, Will. Not because you're broken, not because you're lonely, not because your mistress is in prison and you have nothing left. He is not your consolation prize. Will finally broke. He slumped forward, his face in his hands, and began to sob. Gut-wrenching, pathetic sounds of a man who had truly, finally, lost everything. Catherine watched him for a full minute, her expression cold. She remembered crying like that, alone in a cheap apartment, while he was celebrating with Isabella. This is the final transaction, Will, she said. He looked up, his face a mess. What? I am buying you out. She tossed a file onto the desk. This is a severance agreement. I'm waiving your non-compete clause. In exchange, you will sign this. It terminates your parental rights to Thomas. Officially. Legally. Forever. You want me to sell my son? He choked out. You already did, Catherine said. You sold him for a newer model, for a few more years of arrogance. This is just the paperwork. Sign it, and you are free. I'll buy your remaining, worthless stock options at yesterday's market price. It's enough for you to disappear. Go to Monaco or Singapore. Start over, or don't. I don't care. But you will never, ever contact me or my son again. Will stared at the paper. His signature. For his son. He picked up the pen. He was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at Catherine, searching for one last flicker of the woman he'd married. He found nothing. Only the CAO. He signed the paper. Get out, Catherine said. He stood up, a hollowed-out man, and walked out of her office for the last time. Catherine Alistair stood at her window, looking out at the glittering lights of her city. She was alone, but she was not lonely. She was in control. She picked up her phone and dialed. Hi, sweetheart, she said, her voice instantly warm, all the ice melting away. Yes, I'm just leaving the office. Of course I'll be home in time to read you a story. I love you, Thomas. She hung up, grabbed her coat, and walked out of the dark, silent office, the signed confession of William Harrison's ultimate failure sitting alone on her desk. The fluorescent lights of the JFK International Terminal at 2:00 a.m. were a merciless, buzzing yellow. William Harrison III sat at gate 42, his flight to Singapore delayed by an hour. He was just a man in a rumpled, off-the-rack suit, his face pale and puffy. He held a styrofoam cup of bitter, cold coffee. The severance agreement had been wired. It was a substantial sum, enough to live on, but it was finite. It was the last money he would ever earn from the company his grandfather had built. He was invisible. No one looked at him twice. He was no longer William Harrison III, the Lion of Wall Street. He was just another piece of human freight waiting to be shipped off. He watched a young family nearby. A father, looking exhausted but happy, was hoisting a sleeping little girl onto his shoulder, while his son, about Thomas's age, buzzed around his legs with a toy airplane. The man ruffled his son's hair. "Easy, champ. We'll be on the plane soon." A cold, sharp pain lanced through Will's chest, so intense it made him gasp. It wasn't the loss of the company. It wasn't the loss of his penthouse or his reputation. It was that. The casual, easy affection. The word champ. He had a son. A son he had sold for a non-compete clause. He had spent 5 years trying to build an empire for a child he'd never seen, all while destroying the woman who was raising him. He'd been so obsessed with his legacy that he had failed to see he already had one. He'd traded a human being for a balance sheet, and he'd lost both. When they called his flight, he stood up, dropped his coffee cup in the bin, and walked down the jet bridge without looking back. He had no one to look back for. 200 miles away, in a sprawling, warm duplex overlooking Central Park, a different building, one she had chosen, one she owned. Catherine Alistair was on the floor, building a fortress out of magnetic tiles. "And the dragon can't get in," her 5-year-old son Thomas declared, placing the last triangular piece on top. "He certainly can't," Catherine said, smiling. "This is the strongest fortress in the entire kingdom. Sir Thomas, you have saved us." This was the real Catherine. The suit was gone, replaced by soft cashmere joggers and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was in a messy ponytail. The office was steel and glass, but her home was plush rugs, overflowing bookshelves, and the faint, sweet smell of baked cookies. On the wall was not cold, abstract art, but a giant, joyful finger painting Thomas had made, framed as if it were a Picasso. She had just finished reading him Where the Wild Things Are, and now it was time for bed. She tucked him into his sheets, which were covered in rocket ships. "Mum?" he asked, his voice small in the dim light of his room. "Yes, my love." At school today, Leo was showing everyone pictures of his dad. They went to the zoo. He paused, his bright little mind working. "Mum, I don't have a dad, do I?" The ice from the boardroom threatened for a moment to creep into her veins. It was the question she had been dreading for a year. The last ghost of William Harrison, haunting her son's bedroom. She could lie. She could invent a story about a hero, a traveler, someone who had passed away. But she had rebuilt her life on a foundation of absolute truth. Lies were what Will and Isabella had used. They were weak. She sat on the edge of his bed and took his small hand. "You do have a father, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Everyone does. But your father, he was a man who didn't know how to love. He was a man who made very bad choices. He hurt people. And he hurt me." Thomas's eyes were wide, trying to understand. "Did he hurt me?" "No, he never got the chance," Catherine said, brushing his hair back. "Before you were born, I knew he wouldn't be a good father. He didn't know how to be kind or safe. And my most important job in the whole world, more important than running the company, is to keep you safe. So I made a choice. I decided it would be just you and me. We would be our own team, and we are, aren't we?" "The Alistair team," he whispered, a little smile returning. "The Alistair team," she confirmed, kissing his forehead. "You don't need to worry about him. He's gone, and he can never, ever hurt us. You have me. You have your nanny, Maria. And you have all the love you will ever need. Right here. I have enough for 10 fathers. He seemed to accept this, the truth, simple and clean. He hugged her neck tightly. I love you, Mum. You're the boss. I love you, Thomas. Now go to sleep. She watched him for a long time as his breathing evened out. She had defeated Will in the boardroom. She had exiled Isabella to a prison cell. But this, right here, was the real victory. This was the final, definitive act of erasing Will's poison from her life. She had protected her son, not with a fortress of tiles, but with the truth. A month later, Catherine stood at the head of the old Harrison boardroom table. It had been refurbished, the dark, imposing mahogany replaced with a light, warm oak. Thank you all for coming, she said to the board. I have one final piece of restructuring to announce. The board members, including a grateful Michael Davies, whom she had promoted, looked on. For years, this company operated the Harrison Foundation as a vanity project, a PR shield for its CEO's ego. It did nothing. It built nothing. As of today, I am dissolving it. A few murmurs. That was a big move. In its place, Catherine continued, a new energy in her voice. I am pleased to announce the launch of the Alistair Grant program. It will be a real foundation, endowed with $50 million from the company's new profits. She clicked a remote, and an image appeared on the screen. It wasn't a corporate logo. It was a photo of a young, struggling woman holding a baby. The Alistair Grant program, she said, her voice ringing with a passion they had never heard, will be dedicated to providing capital, legal aid, and financial literacy training to single parents, specifically mothers, who are trying to re-enter the workforce or start their own businesses. We will not be a charity. We will be investors. We will invest in the people no one else will, the people who are overlooked, underestimated, and counted out. She looked around the room, making eye contact with every person. I built Alistair Holdings on a simple principle: find an undervalued, failing asset and rebuild it into something strong, efficient, and powerful. That is exactly what this grant will do. But this time, we won't be investing in broken companies. We'll be investing in broken lives. She looked out the window. It was the same view she had stared at as a prisoner in her own home, 7 months pregnant and terrified. But she wasn't a prisoner anymore. She wasn't just the owner. She was the architect, and she was finally, truly, building something that would last. What a story of betrayal and ultimate triumph. From a publicly humiliated, pregnant wife to the CEO of the very company that cast her out, Catherine Alistair proved that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's a hostile takeover. She didn't just get even, she got everything. What did you think of Will's ultimate fate? Was it too harsh, or did he get exactly what he deserved? And what about Isabella? Let me know in the comments below what your favorite twist in this story was. If you loved this story of justice and revenge, please hit that like button, as it truly helps the channel. Don't forget to share this video with someone else who loves a story where the underdog comes back to run the whole show. And most importantly, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another one of our dramatic, real-life stories. Thanks for listening. He stood in the center of New York's most exclusive restaurant, a symbol of power and success, holding a diamond ring that glittered with the fire of 1,000 captured stars. He was about to place it on the finger of his mistress, a public declaration of his new life, his new love. The crowd was captivated, their phones recording the audacious spectacle. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the woman who had just walked in, the wife he had so casually discarded, wasn't just there to witness her humiliation. She was there to collect her property, because she didn't just own the ring, she owned the entire multi-billion-dollar brand that created it. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a queen taking back her kingdom, one carat at a time. The low hum of contented wealth filled the cavernous space of La Lanterne d'Or. Crystal glasses chimed with the sound of celebratory toasts, and the murmur of discreet conversation wove itself into the soft melodies drifting from a grand piano tucked away in a velvet-draped alcove. This was Jonathan Davenport's natural habitat. He thrived in these environments, places where a man's worth could be measured by the cut of his suit, the vintage of his wine, and the beauty of the woman on his arm. Tonight, he was a king surveying his court, and the woman on his arm was Penelope Vance. Penelope was a masterpiece of modern ambition. Her blonde hair was styled into an impossibly sleek cascade that fell over the bare skin of her back, exposed by a shimmering emerald gown that clung to her every curve. She was 28, 2 decades younger than Jonathan, and she looked at him with an intoxicating blend of awe and adoration that he had long ceased to see in his wife's eyes. He sipped his Chateau Margaux, the dark liquid a perfect complement to the smug satisfaction warming his chest. "Are you nervous, darling?" Penelope whispered, her fingers tracing the lapel of his Tom Ford suit. Jonathan chuckled, a deep, confident sound. "Nervous? Penelope, I've orchestrated multi-billion-dollar mergers. This is a pleasure." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "This is for us. A public statement. No more hiding in the shadows. The world needs to see who the real man of the hour is, and who his leading lady will be." Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, widened with a carefully practiced innocence. "Oh, Jonathan, you're too much." But she didn't mean it. She loved that he was too much. His extravagance was her validation. Every expensive gift, every exclusive reservation, was another brick in the foundation of the life she was meticulously building for herself, a life far removed from her middle-class upbringing in Ohio. Across town, in a brightly lit studio in the meatpacking district that smelled of metal polish and focused creativity, Catherine Reyes was oblivious to the drama about to unfold. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant knot, and a pair of artisan's goggles were pushed up onto her forehead. Her hands, graceful but strong, moved with a familiar certainty over a wax model of a new earring design. This was her sanctuary, the heart of Reyes Jewels, the company her father, the legendary Hector Reyes, had founded, and she had built into a global empire. Reyes Jewels wasn't just another luxury brand, it was an institution. Each piece told a story, infused with a soul that mass-produced jewelry could never replicate. Catherine was the keeper of that soul, while Jonathan, her husband of 19 years, handled the aggressive business strategies and public relations as CEO. She was the architect, the artist, the very essence of the brand. Her phone buzzed on the workbench, and she glanced at the screen. Samantha Jones, her head of operations and closest friend. She swiped to answer, placing it on speaker. "Burning the midnight oil again, Kat." Sam's voice was warm but laced with its usual no-nonsense tone. "Just refining the Persephone collection. The clasp on the locket isn't right. It feels weak," Catherine replied, her eyes not leaving the delicate piece in her hands. "You're the only person on Earth who would lose sleep over the tensile strength of a locket clasp," Sam said with a laugh. There was a pause. "Hey, speaking of things that aren't right, I was going over the quarterly expense reports for the executive accounts." Catherine sighed, finally setting the model down. Sam, please tell me this isn't another lecture about Jonathan's entertainment budget. I wish it were that simple. It's not the dinners at Oriole or the fleet of town cars. There's a charge here from our own flagship store, a significant one. It was coded as a promotional acquisition, but it was processed through his private executive account. A single item. A knot of unease tightened in Catherine's stomach. She had been feeling it for months, a persistent, low-grade dread she tried to push away. The late nights Jonathan attributed to investor calls, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his clothes, the emotional chasm that had opened between them, vast and silent. She had chosen to believe his excuses, to immerse herself in her work because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. "How significant?" Catherine asked, her voice quiet. "Star of Serenity significant," Sam replied, naming one of their most exclusive high-carat bespoke pieces, a flawless 15-carat blue diamond set in a platinum band intricately woven with smaller, brilliant-cut stones. It was a masterpiece of design and rarity. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She knew that piece intimately. She had overseen its creation from the initial sketch to the final polish. That piece was commissioned for the vault. It's not for sale. Well, apparently it is now. Or it was. Jonathan authorized the transfer himself 3 days ago. "The paperwork is all here, signed and sealed," Sam said, the concern in her voice deepening. "Kat, what's going on?" Catherine sank onto her stool, the scent of metal polish suddenly cloying, the weak clasp, the late nights, the emotional distance, and now this, a secret, extravagant purchase of one of her own creations. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. "He told me he had a big charity gala tonight," Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. "At La Lanterne d'Or." A heavy silence hung between them. Sam didn't need to say anything more. They both knew. The charity wasn't a cause. It was a woman. The gala wasn't an event. It was a stage. Back at the restaurant, Jonathan signaled the waiter. The moment had arrived. The lights in the dining room dimmed slightly, a prearranged cue. A hush fell over the tables as diners sensed a spectacle was imminent. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. "Penelope," Jonathan began, his voice resonating with theatrical gravity. "For too long, I have been living a life of obligation, a life in black and white. You brought the color back. You have shown me what true passion, true partnership can be." He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a small velvet box. It was a deep navy blue, the signature color of Rhea's jewels. Penelope gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. This was it, the culmination of all her efforts, the ultimate prize. Jonathan's eyes gleamed with triumph as he opened the box. Nestled inside, the Star of Serenity diamond drank the light of the room and threw it back in a dazzling, fiery explosion of blue and white brilliance. It was more magnificent than she could have ever imagined. With the entire restaurant watching, with dozens of phones held aloft recording his every move, Jonathan Davenport slid off his chair and knelt on one knee before his mistress. "Penelope Vance," he declared, his voice booming in the quiet room, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" 19 years ago, Jonathan Davenport had been different. Or maybe, Catherine often thought, he had been the same man. But she had been a different woman, one who saw him through a filter of youthful optimism and shared dreams. They had met at a gallery opening in Soho. He was a junior investment banker then, sharp and ambitious, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. She was the quiet, intense daughter of the great Hector Reyes, more comfortable at a jeweler's bench than at a cocktail party. He had been fascinated by her world. He didn't just see the sparkle of the finished gems, he saw the fire, the pressure, the meticulous art that transformed a rough stone into a thing of beauty. He would sit for hours in her father's workshop, asking intelligent questions, his eyes alight with genuine curiosity. He hadn't just courted her. He had courted her craft. He saw the potential in Rhea's jewels long before she did. "Your father is a master artist, Kat," he'd told her one evening, his hand covering hers over a table cluttered with sketches. "But this is more than a workshop. It's a legacy. It's a brand. It could be the biggest name in haute joaillerie, bigger than Cartier, bigger than Van Cleef and Arpels." She had been swept away by his vision, his energy. Her father was a purist, content with his bespoke clientele and his sterling reputation. Jonathan saw a global empire. When they married, he brought his business acumen to her artistic heritage. At first, it was a perfect partnership. After Hector Reyes passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years into their marriage, Catherine was devastated, lost in a sea of grief. Jonathan stepped in, a pillar of strength. He took the reins of the business side, assuming the title of CEO, allowing her to grieve and to focus on what she did best: design. "You are the soul of this company, my love," he had assured her. "Let me be the shield. I'll handle the boring stuff, the supply chains, the marketing budgets, the expansion plans. You just create. Create the beauty only you can." And so she had. Under their dual leadership, Rhea's jewels exploded. They opened flagships in Paris, London, and Tokyo. Their pieces adorned royalty and Hollywood A-listers. Jonathan became a celebrated figure in the business world, lauded for his Midas touch, his aggressive and brilliant strategies that had turned a respected family business into a billion-dollar powerhouse. But slowly, subtly, the narrative began to shift. In interviews, our vision became my strategy. Catherine's design became the product my creative team developed. He was the face of the company, the charismatic rainmaker. She, by her own preference for privacy, became the reclusive genius, the name on the box who was rarely seen. The emotional distance between them grew in direct proportion to the company's stock price. The man who once sat mesmerized in her workshop now barely glanced at her sketches. His late nights, once spent with her poring over designs, were now spent at business dinners she was never invited to. The shared passion that had been the bedrock of their relationship was gone, replaced by a polite, professional courtesy. They were partners in business, but strangers in life. Their sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, once a warm home filled with laughter and collaborative energy, had become a gilded cage. It was a showroom for their success, impeccably decorated, yet cold and silent. Catherine found her solace not there, but in the controlled, creative chaos of her private studio. Her work was the one thing that was still truly hers, a direct connection to her father and to the woman she used to be. The rhythmic scrape of a file against metal, the precise click of a setting tool. These were the sounds of her real life. She had tried to ignore the warning signs, burying her hurt and loneliness in the intricate details of a new collection. When a friend had mentioned seeing Jonathan laughing intimately with a young blonde at a polo match in the Hamptons, Catherine had dismissed it as a business meeting. When she found a receipt for a lavish dinner for two at a restaurant she'd never been to, she'd accepted his flimsy excuse about entertaining a client. To acknowledge the truth would be to admit that the entire edifice of her life was a lie. It was easier to believe in the illusion than to face the shattering reality. But the purchase of the Star of Serenity was different. It wasn't just an extravagant expense. It was a violation. That diamond was more than just a stone. It was a symbol, a piece of her family's history. Her father had acquired the raw 50-carat diamond years ago, calling it his someday stone. He believed a gem of that magnitude and unique color had to wait for the perfect design, the perfect moment. After he died, the stone sat in the master vault, a silent, blue-flamed tribute to his legacy. 2 years ago, for their anniversary, Catherine had finally felt ready to honor it. She had designed the Star of Serenity, setting herself, a deeply personal project. The intricate platinum weave was meant to represent their 2 lives intertwining, the smaller, brilliant-cut diamonds, the highlights of their journey together. It was a testament, she had believed, to a love that, though strained, was enduring. She had shown the designs to Jonathan, and he had been uncharacteristically moved. "It's magnificent, Cat." "Truly," he had said, his voice thick with an emotion she now realized was entirely fraudulent. "Let's keep it safe, for a special occasion. For us." Now, he was taking that symbol of us and using it as a prop in a tawdry public spectacle. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was desecrating her father's memory and perverting her own art. He was using the very soul of her life's work to destroy her. The hurt was a physical thing, a white-hot blade twisting in her gut. But as she sat there in the silence of her studio, the pain began to cool, solidifying into something else. It was no longer the fragile grief of a betrayed wife. It was the cold, hard fury of a queen whose castle was under siege. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked over to a full-length mirror and looked at her reflection. She saw the smudge of graphite on her cheek and the fatigue in her eyes. This was not the image of a victim. This was the creator, the architect, the true owner of the Reyes legacy. Jonathan had made a fatal miscalculation. He had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness. He had forgotten that the same hands that could shape delicate filigree could also crush stone. "Sam," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor, now imbued with an icy resolve. "Get the car. We're going to a gala." "What are you going to do?" Sam asked, a hint of awe in her voice. "He wants to make a public statement," Catherine replied, pulling the goggles from her hair and letting it fall around her shoulders. "I'm going to give him one." La Lanterne d'Or was not merely a restaurant, it was a theatre, and its proprietor, Pierre, was a master of stagecraft. The lighting was an intimate, honeyed gold. The tables were spaced far enough apart for secrets to be whispered, but close enough for grand gestures to be witnessed by all. Tonight, the main performance was at Table 12, center stage. The occasion was the annual Gems of the City fundraiser, a black tie event benefiting youth arts programs, a cause Jonathan Davenport championed with loud, public donations that bought him priceless social capital. It was the perfect backdrop for his personal drama. Penelope felt like she was floating. The champagne, the admiring glances from other tables, the weight of Jonathan's hand on the small of her back. It was all intoxicating. She saw her reflection in the polished surface of a silver wine chiller and smiled. This was the woman she was meant to be. Confident, desired, dripping in luxury. The woman who had won. She knew Jonathan was married. He had painted a bleak picture of a cold, passionless relationship with a woman who was, in his words, married to her work. He had described Catherine as a recluse, a fragile artist who had retreated from the world after her father's death, leaving him to run their empire alone. Penelope felt a flicker of pity for the poor woman, but it was quickly extinguished by her own soaring ambition. Jonathan tapped his glass with a fork, and the gentle chime silenced the room. He rose, a broad, confident smile on his face. The diners, a mix of New York's financial elite and old-money philanthropists, turned their attention to him. He was a popular figure, known for his charm and his company's spectacular success. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause. We are here to celebrate art, to nurture the creative spark in the next generation. And in that spirit, I find myself moved to celebrate a more personal work of art." He turned his gaze to Penelope, and her breath hitched. This was more than she had expected. "For a long time," he continued, his voice taking on a confessional tone, "my life was governed by duty, by legacy. I helped build an empire of beautiful things, but my own world felt hollow. And then I met someone who is herself a masterpiece, someone who reminded me that the most precious gems are not the ones we pull from the earth, but the ones we are lucky enough to find in people: passion, vitality, and a love for life." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. This was far more personal than the usual corporate benefactor speech. Across the room, the venerable Mr. Bartholomew, a titan of the luxury goods industry and an old friend of Catherine's father, watched with a deeply furrowed brow, his expression unreadable. Jonathan's hand dipped into his pocket. "And so tonight, as we celebrate new beginnings for the young artists of our city, I want to mark a new beginning for myself." He produced the navy velvet box. A collective gasp went through the room. Penelope felt a dizzying rush of triumph. He was doing it here, in front of everyone. It was a power move, a definitive severing of his past, and a bold claiming of his future with her. He opened the box. The star of serenity ignited under the soft lights. Its blue fire was hypnotic, otherworldly. It was the most beautiful thing Penelope had ever seen. The sheer size and brilliance of it sent another shockwave through the audience. This was not just a ring. It was a statement of unimaginable wealth and intent. This was a queen's ransom. With practiced grace, Jonathan lowered himself to one knee. The flashes of camera phones, previously discreet, now became a strobe-lit frenzy. The moment was being captured, broadcast, immortalized. "Penelope Vance," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with the sincerity of a seasoned performer. "You have shown me what it means to truly live. Will you make me the happiest man in the world? Will you be my wife?" Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, tears of genuine, overwhelming joy. This was her coronation. She opened her mouth to say the single word that would seal her destiny, the word she had been dreaming of for months. "Yes," she began to breathe out, a soft, eager sound. But the word was swallowed by another voice. A voice that was not loud, but carried with such clarity and authority that it sliced through the captivated silence of the room like a shard of diamond. "That's a beautiful piece, Jonathan. I'm glad you appreciate my work." Every head in the restaurant turned towards the grand entrance. Standing there, framed by the ornate archway, was Catherine Reyes. She was not what the room expected. Jonathan's descriptions had painted a picture of a mousy, withdrawn woman, a ghost haunting a workshop. The woman who stood before them was anything but. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that fell to her ankles. It was unadorned, save for a single, breathtaking piece of jewelry, a necklace of her own design, a cascade of white diamonds and sapphires that coiled around her neck like a celestial serpent. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek chignon, and her face, though pale, was a mask of serene composure. She did not look angry or hysterical. She looked like she owned the room. In truth, she owned the very brand that was at the center of the spectacle. Behind her, a step to her left, stood Samantha Jones. in a sharp pantsuit, with a tablet clutched in one hand and an expression of grim satisfaction on her face. Sam looked less like a guest and more like an executioner's aide. Jonathan froze, still on one knee, the ring held aloft. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, purplish hue of pure shock. It was as if he was seeing an apparition. This was impossible. Catherine never came to these events. She hated the schmoozing, the flash bulbs, the superficiality of it all. She was supposed to be in her studio, safely out of sight, oblivious. Penelope stared, her mind struggling to process the scene. Who was this woman? Her poise, her elegance, the way the entire room's energy had shifted to orbit around her. It sent a prickle of fear up Penelope's spine. She glanced at Jonathan's horrified face, and a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced her triumphant haze. Catherine's eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, swept the room once, acknowledging the audience, before settling on the tableau at table 12. She began to walk forward, her heels clicking with a soft, rhythmic cadence on the marble floor. It was not the hurried, frantic pace of a woman wronged. It was the deliberate, unhurried stride of a predator approaching its cornered prey. The whispers started, low and urgent. That's Catherine Reyes, Hector Reyes's daughter, Jonathan's wife. The last word hung in the air, charged and damning. Catherine reached the table. She didn't look at Jonathan. Her gaze fell upon the ring glittering in the box, and then lifted to meet Penelope's confused and fearful eyes. Catherine's expression was not one of anger, but of something far more unnerving. A clinical, almost pitiful assessment. "He didn't tell you, did he?" Catherine's voice was calm, conversational, yet it carried an edge of steel. "About who I am, or about that ring?" Penelope could only shake her head, her fairy tale moment crumbling into a nightmare. Jonathan scrambled to his feet, his face a mess of confusion and burgeoning rage. "Catherine, what in God's name are you doing here?" he hissed, trying to keep his voice low, to contain the escalating disaster. "You're making a scene. This is a private matter." Catherine finally turned her gaze to him. The look in her eyes was one he had never seen before. The warmth, the tolerance, the quiet forbearance. It was all gone. In its place was a chilling clarity, the dispassionate focus of a master jeweler inspecting a flawed stone. "A private matter?" she repeated, her voice still level, but now laced with a potent irony. "You got down on one knee in a room full of people, with cameras flashing, to propose to your mistress using a ring I designed for our 20th wedding anniversary. You made this public, Jonathan. I'm just here to add a little context." The word mistress landed like a physical blow. Penelope flinched, her face flushing with a deep, painful scarlet. The whispers in the room grew louder, more fevered. Mr. Bartholomew, at his corner table, leaned forward, his expression now one of intense, grim fascination. Sam stepped forward slightly, positioning herself to the side, her phone now in her hand, discreetly recording. Not for social media, but for evidence. Catherine had planned every move. This was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated, strategic demolition. The architect had arrived, and she was about to show everyone the fatal flaws in the foundation of the life her husband had built. Jonathan, regaining a sliver of his bravado, tried to seize control. "Catherine, you're being hysterical. You're overwrought. Let's go home and discuss this." He reached for her arm, a gesture of command disguised as concern. Catherine moved her arm away with a motion so fluid and final, it was as if he had touched air. "Don't," she said, the single word sharp enough to make him recoil. "We have nothing to discuss at home. Everything that needs to be said will be said right here." She turned her attention back to Penelope, who looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole, Catherine's voice softened, but not with sympathy, with the detached tone of a professor explaining a complex but tragic theorem. "That ring," she began, gesturing towards the box Jonathan still clutched in his trembling hand, "is called the Star of Serenity. The central stone is a 15.2-carat, fancy, vivid blue diamond, internally flawless. My father acquired the rough stone in Botswana over 30 years ago. He never cut it because he was waiting for the right inspiration." She paused, letting the history of the stone sink in. This was not just a product off a shelf. It was a legacy. "I designed that setting myself. Every detail has a meaning. Do you see the interwoven platinum bands?" She looked at Penelope, forcing the younger woman to meet her gaze. They were meant to represent two separate lives twisting together to become stronger. The 19 smaller diamonds embedded along the band, one for each year of our marriage. The hidden sapphire on the inside of the band is my birthstone. I designed it as an anniversary gift. For my husband. From me. Each sentence was a perfectly aimed blow, dismantling Penelope's fantasy piece by piece. The ring on which she had pinned all her hopes was not a symbol of her future, but an artifact of a marriage she had helped destroy. It was a stolen heirloom. Penelope looked from the ring to Jonathan, her eyes wide with accusation. "You told me you had it commissioned for me," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jonathan sputtered. "I did. Catherine, you're twisting things. This is a malicious lie." "A lie?" Catherine's voice sharpened. "Sam!" Sam stepped forward, holding her tablet. On the screen was a crystal-clear image of Catherine's original, hand-drawn design sketches for the Star of Serenity. They were dated, signed K. Reyes, and watermarked. "The original design schematics, dated 2 years ago," Sam announced crisply, "along with the GIA certification for the stone, which lists the Reyes family trust as the original owner." Catherine continued, her focus now lasered onto Jonathan. "And as for how you commissioned it, let's talk about that. You didn't buy this ring, Jonathan. You stole it." "That's slander," he snarled, his face contorting with rage. "Is it?" Catherine's calm was terrifying. "You used your executive discretionary fund to authorize a promotional transfer of the ring from the master vault to your possession. The transaction, number 7274B1, was processed at 4:15 p.m. 3 days ago. The stated purpose was for a showcase at a potential investor event. You forged the acquisition request, bypassing the standard multi-signature protocol required for any item valued over $1 million. You know the protocol because you wrote it." The level of detail was staggering. This wasn't an emotional outburst, it was an indictment. She was laying out a case for grand larceny in the middle of a 5-star restaurant. "The value of that ring is not what you paid, because you paid nothing. Its appraised insurance value is $28.5 million, or," Catherine stated, her voice resonating in the dead silent room. "You took a corporate asset, a piece of my family's history, and attempted to gift it to your mistress as a personal item. That's not just infidelity, Jonathan. That's embezzlement. That's fraud." Penelope let out a small, choked sob. Her dream had curdled into a sordid, criminal conspiracy. She looked at the diamond, and it no longer looked beautiful. It looked like evidence. It felt heavy, tainted, a millstone that could drag her down with him. Jonathan was cornered. His bluster had evaporated, leaving behind the raw panic of a man whose carefully constructed world was imploding in real time. He looked around the room, at the faces of his peers, his investors, his friends. He saw no support, only shock, disgust, and the cold, unforgiving judgment of his social and financial equals. Mr. Bartholomew was slowly shaking his head, a look of profound disappointment on his aged face. "You," Jonathan stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Catherine. "You will regret this. I built this company while you were hiding in your workshop." A humorless smile touched Catherine's lips. "That is the biggest lie of all," she said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal. "You didn't build anything, Jonathan. You were the auctioneer. I was the artist. You sold the paintings. I bled the paint onto the canvas. You took the credit for my work, for my father's legacy. You thought I was a silent partner you could control. You thought I was just a name. But you forgot something." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "My name is on the building. My name is on the box. And my name is on every single share that gives you the power you so arrogantly flaunt. You are an employee, Jonathan, and your performance review is long overdue." The finality of Catherine's words hung in the air like the silence after a lightning strike. The illusion of Jonathan Davenport, the master of the universe, the charismatic CEO, had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. He was left exposed, a common thief and an adulterer, stripped of his power and prestige in front of the very audience he had sought to impress. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell into a profound, uncomfortable quiet. The only sound was the distant clatter of a dropped fork from the kitchen. No one dared to speak. They were witnesses to a complete and total annihilation, executed with the cold precision of a surgeon. Jonathan's face cycled through a series of emotions: rage, denial, fear, and finally, a pathetic, pleading desperation. "Catherine, please," he whispered, the sound pathetic in the vast silence. "Not here. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix," Catherine stated flatly. Her gaze was unflinching. "You broke it. And I don't repair broken things, Jonathan. I melt them down and create something new." It was then that Penelope made her move. With trembling hands, she reached up to her ear, unhooking a pair of diamond earrings, a gift from Jonathan last month. She placed them quietly on the table. Then she slipped off a delicate diamond bracelet, a birthday present. It joined the earrings. Her movements were jerky, frantic. She was shedding the gilded skin he had given her, desperate to distance herself from his toxicity, from the impending wreckage. Finally, she looked at the star of serenity, still in its box in Jonathan's hand. She wouldn't even touch it. She looked at Jonathan, her face a mask of revulsion and betrayal. "You used me," she said, her voice thick with tears. "You told me she was nobody. You told me this was our future. It was. It is," Jonathan pleaded, turning to her. But his words were hollow. "No," Penelope said, shaking her head as she backed away from the table. "This is your mess. I want no part of it." With a final, mortified glance at Catherine, she turned and fled, weaving through the tables of stunned onlookers and disappearing out the front door, her emerald dress a streak of color vanishing into the night. She left her glass of champagne, her half-eaten meal, and her entire fantasy life behind on the table. Jonathan was now truly alone. He stood, a pariah at his own party, clutching the multi-million-dollar ring that had become a symbol of his ruin. He turned his fury back to Catherine. "You think you can just waltz in here and ruin me? I am the CEO of Reyes Jewels. I have contracts. I have a board." "About that," Catherine interrupted smoothly. As the majority shareholder, holding 75% of the voting stock, which I inherited directly from my father, and which our prenuptial agreement, which you called a mere formality, keeps securely in my name, I have the authority to call an emergency session of the board. In fact, I did so an hour ago, via a secure video conference. Sam held up her tablet again. This time, it showed the faces of the 4 other board members in a live video call, each looking grim and resolute. They've all seen the preliminary evidence of your financial malfeasance, Jonathan, Catherine continued, her tone chillingly professional. They've seen the unauthorized transfer logs. They've also been made aware of the blatant misuse of company assets for personal gain, which constitutes a severe breach of your fiduciary duty and your employment contract. As of 5 minutes ago, the board voted unanimously. Your position as CEO of Reyes Jewels is terminated, effective immediately. Your corporate accounts have been frozen. The security codes to your office have been changed. The locks on our home will be changed within the hour. 2 large, imposing men in dark suits who had entered the restaurant discreetly a few moments earlier now stepped forward. They were not restaurant security. They had the hard, professional look of a private corporate security detail. Sam had summoned them. "These gentlemen will escort you off the premises," Catherine said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Your personal effects from the office will be couriered to a location of your choosing. You are no longer welcome in any Reyes Jewels establishment. You are no longer welcome in my life." One of the security men gently but firmly took the velvet box from Jonathan's nerveless grasp and handed it to Catherine. She accepted it without a word. Jonathan stared at her, his mouth agape. He was defeated. He had no moves left to make. The empire he had boasted of building had cast him out. The woman he had dismissed as a fragile artist had checkmated him in public. He was nothing. As the security guards flanked him and began to lead him towards the exit, he shot one last, venomous look at Catherine. "You'll be nothing without me. You'll run it into the ground." Catherine simply watched him go, her expression serene. The crowd parted as the disgraced CEO was escorted out like a common criminal. When the door swung shut behind him, a collective breath was released. The performance was over. Catherine stood for a moment, the velvet box in her hand. Then she turned to the stunned room. She looked directly at Mr. Bartholomew, who raised his wine glass in a silent, respectful toast. Catherine gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then she addressed the room. "My apologies for the interruption," she said, her voice calm and strong. "Please enjoy your evening. And don't forget to give generously to the Gems of the City Fund. The arts are a worthy investment." With that, she turned, and with Sam at her side, she walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the wreckage of her old life to step into the dawn of her new one. 6 months later, the air in the Reyes Jewels flagship store on Fifth Avenue was electric. The scandal at La Lanterne d'Or had become the stuff of New York legend, a tale of corporate intrigue and personal justice that had paradoxically been the best publicity the brand could have ever hoped for. The story wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was about the quiet, brilliant woman who had reclaimed her throne. Catherine Reyes was no longer the reclusive artist behind the brand. She was its fierce, celebrated heart. The store was packed for the unveiling of her newest collection, the Phoenix. It was her first solo collection as both Chief Creative Officer and CEO, and the industry was watching with bated breath. They were not disappointed. The pieces were bold, innovative, and deeply personal. They spoke of fire, of rebirth, of strength forged in adversity. Critics raved, calling it her masterwork. Sales had skyrocketed. Catherine had not just saved her company from her husband, she had made it more successful than ever. Jonathan Davenport had faded into obscurity. Mired in lawsuits and facing federal fraud charges, he had become a social and professional pariah. His name was a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Penelope Vance had reportedly moved back to Ohio, her New York ambitions reduced to ash. In her private workshop, the one place that had always been her sanctuary, Catherine stood before her workbench. The chaos of the past few months had settled, and she was left with a profound sense of peace and purpose. Sam came in, holding 2 flutes of champagne. "To the Phoenix," Sam said, handing Catherine a glass. "We've already sold out of the centerpiece necklace. A Saudi princess bought it over the phone." Catherine smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "To the Phoenix," she echoed, clinking her glass against Sam's. "And to good friends who bring you champagne and help you stage corporate coups." They both laughed, a warm, easy sound. After Sam left, Catherine turned her attention to a velvet tray on her bench. On it lay the Star of Serenity. For months, she hadn't been able to look at it. It was a monument to her pain, a symbol of the deepest betrayal. She had considered selling it, breaking it down, locking it away forever. But that would be letting Jonathan win. It would mean he had succeeded in tainting it. Her father had taught her that every stone has a story. This stone's story had taken a dark turn, but she was the author, and she could write a new chapter. With the careful, practiced hands of a master, she began to work. She removed the magnificent blue diamond from its setting, the platinum band, the one meant to symbolize their intertwined lives, she placed into a crucible. She turned up the flame of her torch and watched as the metal that represented 19 years of lies softened, glowed, and melted into a formless, liquid silver pool. It was a catharsis. She spent the next few weeks redesigning. She took the 19 smaller diamonds, the ones that had marked each year of their marriage, and set them into a new piece. A magnificent brooch in the shape of a rising phoenix, its wings spread wide. It was a gift for Sam, a thank you for her unwavering loyalty. The Star of Serenity diamond itself she set into a new, singular piece. Not a ring to be given by a man, but a pendant. The design was simple, powerful, and utterly modern. The diamond was now the heart of a stylized star, its platinum points sharp and clean. It was no longer a symbol of a partnership, but a declaration of a single, brilliant entity. It was a symbol of her own light, her own resilience. It was no longer the Star of Serenity. She renamed it the Polaris, the North Star, constant, true, and a guide for one's own journey. She clasped the finished pendant around her own neck. It lay cool against her skin. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, not at a woman who had survived, but at a woman who had triumphed. The pain was a part of her story, a facet that had been cut into her, but it no longer defined her. It had simply added to her brilliance. Her legacy was not just her father's, and it was certainly not Jonathan's. It was hers, reclaimed and reforged in fire. And as the blue diamond on her chest caught the light, it sparkled with the promise of a future that was entirely and beautifully her own. A year had passed since the night at La Lanterne d'Or, a year of rebuilding, not just a company, but a life. The penthouse, once a monument to a shared and hollow success, was now entirely Catherine's. She had stripped it of Jonathan's heavy, masculine aesthetic, replacing dark woods and somber leathers with clean lines, soft textures, and an abundance of light. It was no longer a showroom, but a home, filled with art that inspired her, and silence that comforted her. One cool autumn evening, as a gentle rain whispered against the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, Catherine was reviewing the preliminary sketches for the next spring collection. The Polaris pendant, her personal emblem of victory, lay against her silk blouse, a familiar, cool weight. Her work was her joy now, unburdened by the need to please or accommodate anyone but her own creative vision. The company was stronger than ever, its narrative of authenticity and female strength resonating with a new generation of clients. The intercom buzzed, a harsh intrusion into the tranquility. She frowned, not expecting anyone. It was Wesley, the stern but protective doorman who had worked in the building for 2 decades. "Mrs. Reyes," his voice was strained, apologetic. "I am so sorry to disturb you. There is a man here, a Mr. Davenport. He is asking to see you. I told him you are not accepting visitors, but he is insistent." Catherine's blood ran cold for a single, fleeting moment. Jonathan. The name felt alien, a relic from a past life. She hadn't seen or heard from him since his unceremonious exit from the restaurant. His lawyers had communicated with hers, a sterile and bitter exchange that had finalized their divorce and settled the criminal charges with a plea deal that involved hefty fines and a permanent ban from the financial industry. He had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist in her world. "Wesley, you know my instructions," she said, her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am, I do. But he says it is a matter of life and death. He looks unwell, Mrs. Reyes. I would not have called otherwise." A part of her, the logical, self-protective part championed by Sam, screamed to refuse, to have Wesley call security and have him removed. But another, deeper part of her felt a strange sense of obligation, not to him, but to the woman she was now. A queen does not hide from ghosts. She faces them, and by facing them, banishes them from her kingdom for good. This was the final piece of unfinished business. "It's all right, Wesley," she said, her decision made. "Send him up." A few minutes later, the chime of the private elevator announced his arrival. Catherine stood in the center of her living room, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. When the doors slid open, the man who stepped out was a grotesque caricature of the Jonathan she had known. The impeccable Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, ill-fitting blazer. His face was gaunt, his skin had a pasty, unhealthy pallor, and the confident gleam in his eyes had been replaced by a haunted, desperate flicker. He was a man hollowed out from the inside, the architecture of his arrogance having collapsed, leaving only a ruin. He stopped, taking in the transformed apartment. "You've changed the place," he murmured, his voice raspy. "I have," Catherine replied, her tone neutral. "What do you want, Jonathan?" He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes pleading. "Catherine, I know I have no right to be here. I know I am the last person on earth you want to see." He wrung his hands, a nervous, pathetic gesture. "But I had to see you. To tell you I am sorry." Catherine remained silent, her expression unchanging. She had learned that a man like Jonathan only ever used the word sorry as a key to unlock a door he wanted to walk through. He seemed to take her silence as an invitation to continue. "I was a fool, Cat, a blind, arrogant fool. I had everything. We had everything. I let my ego, this chase for more, I let it poison me. And that woman, Penelope, she was nothing. A symptom of the disease, not the cause. A mistake. A terrible, meaningless mistake." He was trying to weave a narrative of a good man who had lost his way, hoping to appeal to a well of sympathy he assumed must still exist. He had always underestimated her. "I'm ruined, Catherine," he said, his voice cracking. "My reputation, my career, it's all gone. I have nothing. I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I know what I lost. I lost you." Catherine finally spoke, her voice as calm and clear as the rain against the window. "What you lost, Jonathan, was a source of income. You lost a brand you could take credit for. You lost a wife who was convenient and quiet. You never had me. Not really. Because to have someone, you have to see them. And you never saw me. You saw a name, a legacy, an asset. You saw a walking, talking vault of intellectual property you could exploit. He flinched as if she had slapped him. That's not true. Isn't it? She countered, taking a small step forward. Your apology isn't about the pain you caused me. It's about the consequences you are suffering. You're not sorry for the betrayal. You're sorry you got caught. You're not here for my forgiveness. You're here for some kind of absolution so you can sleep at night. Or perhaps you're here for a handout. His desperate eyes gave him away. That was the core of it. He was broken, and he had come back to the person he had broken, hoping she had a spare part for him. I don't hate you, Jonathan, she said, and the words surprised him. They surprised her a little, too. Hate requires passion. It requires energy. And you are no longer worth my energy. When I look at you, I don't feel anger. I feel a profound pity. You had a seat at a banquet, and you chose to steal the silverware instead. You'll never understand what you truly threw away. She walked to the door of the apartment and held it open, a clear, final gesture. He looked at her, at the magnificent apartment, at the glittering city beyond the windows, a world he was no longer a part of. He saw the Polaris pendant at her throat, a stone he had tried to steal, now worn as her personal badge of honor. He saw a woman he had never known, a woman forged into steel in the fire he had set. Defeated, he shuffled past her without another word and stepped back into the elevator. Catherine watched as the doors slid shut, sealing him away. She closed the door to her home, the click of the latch echoing in the quiet room. It was the sound of the final sentence, of the final chapter of a long and painful book. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel sad. She felt light. The last echo of the lie was gone. The ghost was banished. She walked back to the window, looking down at the endless tapestry of lights that was New York City. It was her city, her business, her life. And for the first time, with no shadows of the past lurking at her door, it was entirely and completely hers to command. That night at the restaurant wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the birth of an icon. Catherine Reyes reminded us that a person's true worth is never defined by someone else's betrayal. It's defined by how they rise from the ashes. Jonathan thought he was taking everything from her, but he only succeeded in giving her back the one thing he had stolen over the years, her own power. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that sometimes the most devastating moments of our lives are just setting the stage for our greatest comeback. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Could you have been as calm and calculated as she was? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will leave you breathless. Thank you for listening.